I would like to read you a statement that I wrote about voluntarily stopping eating or drinking, which is called VSED. After two decades of working as a palliative care doctor, taking care of people with chronic illnesses such as heart, lung, kidney, and liver disease, as well as dementia and Parkinson's disease, I was diagnosed with early onset dementia. This was pretty devastating for me, as I had observed how it can be a very long, unpredictable progression, and that it's really hard on the caregiver, and sometimes the patient is unaware, but the caregivers are really suffering from fatigue and distress, and they tend to neglect their own health to take care of their loved one. For me, this diagnosis was terrible news, as I'm sure it would be for anyone. Dementia is a degenerative disease of the mind. It progresses like other chronic diseases of the body, and it does not improve over time, although there are some medicines that are supposed to slow down its progression. They don't always work, or they have side effects that make it hard for the patient to tolerate. At this time, there's no cure, and there's no way to predict how long it will take for the person to ultimately die as a result of their dementia. It usually takes several years, and the last few of these years are requiring almost 24-hour hands-on care, either at home or in a facility. My husband first noticed the changes in my memory and behavior, and this is pretty typical, as it's usually the person who's living with you or who sees you every single day who sees the changes, because they can be subtle in the beginning. I was really upset with him. I was in denial and angry, and felt that the changes he was worried about were simply small changes in my memory that were typical of growing older. I thought he was amplifying the meaning of them and over-exaggerating, but he was truly bothered and worried. And it took me several months after he initially observed these changes that I began to feel like I was doing some things differently that just didn't make sense, and that he might be right. And later I realized he was right. Some of the things I had started doing in the later months, or most recently, I put my prescription medicines away in the food pantry instead of the medicine cabinet. I put non-food items into the refrigerator. I forgot ingredients in familiar recipes, and the food would come out tasting wrong. I double booked myself for a series of different appointments and would forget them or confuse the day and time. I constantly had to refer to the calendar to remind myself of what we were supposed to do that day. My husband has to help me grocery shop now because I I duplicate my buying and don't realize it. And there's a lot of stuff in the pantry that I don't realize I've already purchased. Recently, when attempting to drive, I backed into a closed garage door, and my driving has been curtailed. I'm no longer driving. Eventually, we went to a neurologist who confirmed the diagnosis. I've always valued being able to use my mind to engage the world. I'm someone who grew up respecting language, words, and debates around the dinner table. It's very scary to think about losing my mind while my body's still waiting to get old enough for a, quote, appropriate time to die, end quote. As a doctor, I observed many families struggle with the slow decline of their loved ones over time. And as a daughter, I witnessed it in my parents. My mother was in a very small, loving facility that I visited frequently after work. She gradually ate and moved less and stayed in a recliner for most of her days until she died. The last 3 weeks or so, she wouldn't get out of bed, and I say wouldn't. It basically is she was unable to. Her mind could not tell her body how to do that complex action, and if she were to be moved, it would need 2+ people to lift her up out of the bed and put her in a different position. She finally died peacefully, and she was very pleasant for most of her time as a lady with dementia. My father's progression was later in life and faster, with about 4 to 5 years of trying to keep up with his finances, and eventually in the last year or two the family realized he was having trouble and helped, pitched in, but he was pretty resistant to that. And then he started having falls, and ultimately he was hospitalized with a seizure/stroke, and then became extremely agitated as soon as he was released from the hospital, and ultimately he had to be placed in hospice care because we were unable to keep him calm at home, and he needed more sedation just to calm him from his hallucinations. He had a very aggressive, agitated dementia in the last 3 days of his life. I choose to die by VSED because I want to avoid the long, relentless decline and the complete loss of self that is associated with the late stages of dementia. I don't want my family to go through the suffering of witnessing my decline. I don't want to be in 24-hour care for years while I just am kept alive for the duration of time until I die, and it is no longer a quality life. My choice is to give up a few good days to avoid bad years. To me, bad years means living in a facility, being cared for by others, no longer recognizing my family, losing my individual personality, and looking out at the world with a blank stare, like the stare my mother gave me in her final days. This scenario is not the quality of life for me. Instead, it represents loss of dignity and loss of independence. Earlier, when reading about VSED, I wondered what would be my precious window of opportunity to start VSED, since there are several years of decline in dementia involved. One always wants to be in a window where their goal is clear to them and they can state what they want and understand what it means and remember that they want VSED. Get into that window and don't miss it, because if you miss the window, you forget who you are or why you don't want to go through years of this disease. But when I thought about this window, I realized that it will always be too early in the judgment of some people who are not living my life. So I am going to start VSED when I feel ready, even though it may seem too early to some friends or family members. I don't want to miss my window of opportunity. Again, my choice is to have a few quality days with loved ones in order to maintain control of my life and prevent unnecessary suffering for me and for them. That is what makes my life worth it to me. I don't want a future where money is spent on custodial cares or staying alive when I don't know who I am or who I'm with. I want to die naturally over a matter of days to weeks by not eating or drinking. Thank you for listening to this. I appreciate your attention. And it is a hard decision, and not every person wants the same thing, but I'm glad there's a choice.